and request or demand that he should consider recusing himself from the commission because of a matter in which he represented a certain Mr. Lakay and an allegation that he is close to Minister Gordhan and that he should recuse himself for that reason. Within the time available, Mr. Pretorius has given me clarification in regard to the matter, but I think that those who may wish to request that he should recuse himself should write to the commission with a substantiation of the allegations so that they can then be looked into properly. But from what Mr. Pretorius has told me so far within the time available to him, I'm satisfied that there is no problem with him continuing. If and when at a later stage there are other facts that are put before the commission that are not known to me at this stage, the matter would be looked into again at that stage. But the party concerned, if they send a written complaint to the commission with substantiation of facts, their appeal or request will be looked into properly. Thank you. I think the registrar will then administer an affirmation to Minister Gordhan.
Please state your full names for the record.
Pravin Gordhan.
Do you have any objection with making the prescribed affirmation?
No.
Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I affirm.
If so, please raise your right hand and say, I truly affirm.
I affirm, and I truly affirm.
Thank you. Thank you. You may be seated. Thank you very much. Before Mr. Pretorius begins, I just want to thank you, Minister Gordhan, for coming forward to assist the commission. We have been making a call to all South Africans who may have information about the matters that we are investigating to come forward, and we have made a call to present and past ministers, deputy ministers, directors general, and so on, to please come forward with regard to any knowledge or information that they have on matters that fall under what we are investigating. And some have come forward, and we are grateful for that, and we are grateful that you also have come forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. We see it as our responsibility.
Thank you.
Good morning, Minister.
Good morning.
Minister, you have before you in bundle N1A a statement of some 60-odd pages, and your signature appears on page 68. Is that correct? Before we ask you to confirm your statement, I'm told that there's a correction you wish to bring at paragraph 79.
Thank you, Mr. Pretorius and Chairperson. It's, I thought we will do the correction when we get there, but Mr. Pretorius is right.
I'm sorry, Mr. Gordhan. Maybe you might wish to raise your voice. I'm struggling to hear you from here. I must check at the back whether they can hear you. Can you hear the witness from there? There are indications of yes and no. So,
Well, good morning to everyone.
so I think with a raised voice, it should be fine. Thank you.
So at paragraph 79, Chairperson, sorry, I'm not sure whether the protocol is chairman or chairperson.
Yeah, no, that's
Is that
okay.
Particularly with reference to the last sentence, where it says rand depreciated sharply from 1340 to 1540 in relation to the US dollar overnight. We obtained more accurate numbers from Bloomberg yesterday.
I'm sorry. Did you say paragraph 89?
79.
79.
May I interject, Minister Gordhan? For the present, perhaps
I've
we
got
could
it
just
now.
delete the sentence.
We can delete the sentence and we'll give you the numbers later, if that's okay.
Which sentence must we delete?
The last sentence.
Oh,
Paragraph 79, the last sentence.
is that the only correction on that paragraph?
Yes.
Yes, Chair.
Okay.
Then, Minister Gordhan, the signature on page 68, that is your signature, I understand,
Yes.
are the contents of the statement true and correct?
Yes.
If I may, just by way of introduction, tell the Chair that your intention is to give your evidence in your own words, but there are portions of the statement that you wish to read, and we'll come to them in due course. They're mainly quotations from other sources.
That's correct.
Just to deal with the scope of your statement, Minister Gordhan, by way of introduction, we are dealing with terms of reference 1.1 to 1.3, which deal principally with the appointment and dismissals of ministers of state. And your evidence, as I understand it, is intended to deal with the circumstances prevalent at the time of the appointment and dismissals of ministers, some who have already testified and about which witnesses have testified.
That's correct.
You will also deal to a certain extent with issues of governance, and particularly in relation to state-owned enterprises, I understand.
It's part of the statement, yes.
But there are aspects of the terms of reference which you may wish to deal with at a later stage, or your department, the Department of Public Enterprises, may wish to deal with at a later stage.
That's with particular reference to state-owned enterprises and what we are beginning, and we're only beginning to discover in terms of both governance issues and malfeasance, Chairperson, in these enterprises. We are in the process as a department of identifying as many documents as possible. Representatives from the department have been in touch with the investigating team of the Commission. They've had many exchanges to date, and wherever possible, documents or copies thereof have been handed to the Commission. Obviously, some documents might well have been destroyed already, but when we come to that, we'll keep you informed.
Yes. There are also, I understand, matters in relation to Treasury and your portfolio previously as Minister of Finance that may have to be dealt with at a later stage.
Some of them, Chairperson, I actually dealt with in this statement by way of illustration of some of the requirements of 1.1 to 1.3. But there are also, which I'm sure Mr. Pretorius will come to, certain questions that your team has asked me to cover, which is also contained in the statement.
Yes. Before I invite you, Minister Gordhan, to make any opening comments that you wish to, may I just place on record with your assistance the history of the statement which is before the Commission at present. A draft statement, not an affidavit, was presented to the legal team on the 30th of September. You recall that?
Yes.
Certain additions were made to that statement as a result of requests from the legal team of the Commission, asking you to address specific issues that they wished you to deal with.
That's correct.
A further statement was then produced and together with a bundle was delivered on the 13th of October, received, I understand, on the 15th of October by the legal team. And
Yes.
that is the statement before you.
That's correct. May I, with your permission, Chair, at this stage, ask your permission to, following that particular question, for the benefit of the Commission's investigation into the so-called leak of this document,
Yes.
indicate that the draft statement with which, or on which, both I and my legal team had interactions with Mr. Pretorius and company was only sent to Mr. Pretorius and the team. And yet there are tweets which seem to draw comparisons between the draft and the final statement. So this is for the record. It's a matter for the Commission to look into. If there's a very limited circulation of the first draft as compared to the final version,
Yeah.
it's quite intriguing, to say the least, that certain parties seem to have had access
Yes.
and are able to comment
Yes.
in that particular regard. But that's just for the record.
No, thank you. The investigation into the leaks is continuing, and I caused the Secretary of the Commission to issue a media statement on Friday, which I understand was circulated, asking for those who have indicated in the media that they know who was responsible for the leaks to bring evidence. But the investigation is continuing.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, at paragraph 1 of your statement, you refer to the submission of your statement to this Commission. Just again to place on record for clarity's sake, the statement and the bundles annexed were prepared by your legal team.
Correct.
And in paragraph 2, you deal with the scope of the statement, which I've already mentioned in opening. Do you have any comment?
No, as I said earlier, Chairperson, the statement clearly refers to the appointment and dismissal of ministers. I'm not sure if I hold the record in that regard, but we'll come back to that. Related matters which illustrate what were the issues that might have had a bearing on the events that unfolded as far as appointments and dismissals are concerned. and thirdly, the additional issues that I was asked to address.
Before we proceed into the content of your statement, do you wish to make any further opening comments?
No, as soon as you allow me to, I'll go to paragraph 4 and present my opening statement.
In paragraph 3, you mention that the account is based on your own recollection, but that your memory has been refreshed by certain officials working with you. Do you have any comment there?
No, just to make the point that, particularly with reference to Chairperson, the job of a Minister of Finance, it requires that there are many different events, both internationally and locally, and many different types of meetings, and that not all of the events or meetings are fresh in one's mind, and I did rely on checking, for example, my diary at the Treasury, or checking with my former Chief of Staff or officials at the Treasury where it was appropriate and possible for them to recollect what really happened. So some have been trying to caricature the memory factor, but we are getting a bit on in age as well, one must confess that. And that's the basis upon which the statement is drafted.
Thank you. At paragraph 4, you deal with your own personal background and the approach that you have taken historically in your political career. Before we go into those paragraphs, you said that you wish to make some opening remarks. Could you also inform the Commission of your history in ministerial positions and as a Member of Parliament?
Well, if I may state an amplification of paragraph 4 as I get into your question, Mr. Pretorius. I've been an activist from the late 1960s, and we might recall that at that time the ANC was banned, but one of the arms of the Congress Alliance, as it was known then, was not, and that is the Natal Indian Congress. And an older generation of Congress activists in early 1970s decided to reactivate the Natal Indian Congress as a flag bearer of the Freedom Charter within the country at the time. And that was the organization that began to politicize a lot of us who were on campuses at the time, as did the Black consciousness movement of the time as well. Secondly, we didn't see politics as a career. It was a commitment to changing this country for the betterment of all the people of this country. And we had an instinctive, if you like, belief that whatever happens at whichever stage in our history, the benefits of those events and transformation processes that unfold must be benefits that accrue to the majority and not to a small minority, an issue that is not irrelevant to the evidence that we're going to give here today. Thirdly, the process leading up to becoming a minister started firstly in the negotiations in the early 1990s at CODESA, and the multi-party negotiations, which I had the privilege of participating in. Secondly, then becoming a Member of Parliament in 1994 until 1998, when I became the Deputy Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service. Then between 1999 and 2009 April, I was the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service. And in early 2009, Chairperson, I was in fact interviewed for the job of CEO of Transnet, interestingly, and was even offered the job. And I had accepted the job, but the ANC requested that I hang on. And after the elections in 2009, I was asked by the President to serve as the Minister of Finance between 2009 and 2014. After the 2014 elections, I was designated or assigned to the COCTA portfolio, Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, where I served until the 13th of December 2015.
Okay, I'm sorry, let me interrupt you. If you could just go back to how you said the ANC, I think, said something when you had accepted the job for, I think it's the group CEO for Transnet, I think it was. What did the ANC say, and why did it say what it said?
No, just that I should wait until after the elections. No promises.
Okay.
And no intrigue either.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So that takes us, Chair, to the 13th of December 2015, on the evening of which I was requested to go over to Mashtamba and Lovo, the residence of the then President Zuma. Had a meeting with him, and I'm sure we'll come to that in the rest of the statement, and at which meeting he asked that I take the portfolio of finance again. I was reluctant to do so. I actually suggested two other names of people who would be very appropriate for that position, given their experience. One was Mr. Jonas, who has already appeared before you, and the second, Mr. Jabu Moleketi, who was previously Deputy Minister of Finance with Minister Manuel at the time. Notwithstanding those two suggestions, I was requested to take up the job, and the context, of course, was the turmoil in the financial markets after the dismissal of Minister Nene, and the appointment of Mr. Van Rooyen as Minister of Finance, and a lot of concern and panic over that Thursday, Friday, and Saturday about what would happen in the markets on the Monday, i.e. the 14th of December 2015. Eventually, after consulting my family, I did take the position and served in that position until just past midnight on the 30th of March, when watching television and the intrigue that was unfolding at the time, and learned from the TV screen that a number of us were in fact dismissed. That included Minister Hanekom, Minister Ramatlodi, amongst many others.
So you were not informed ahead of the TV announcement that you were no longer going to continue in the position?
No, regrettably, I wasn't extended that courtesy. I then remained as a member of parliament, which I was from the 2014 elections, and remained as a member serving on the Public Enterprises Committee, and had an interesting year during which we, under the leadership of Ms. Ranto, was the chair of the inquiry into Eskom. At the time, learned a lot about the malfeasance and corruption and state capture of that institution. We then have the events of the governing party in December 2017, which led to Mr. Ramaphosa becoming president, and then subsequently February 2018, when Mr. Ramaphosa becomes the president of the country. And thereafter, another cabinet reshuffle, and I was asked to serve in my present capacity as the Minister of Public Enterprises.
Minister, you were a member of Parliament, or you remain a member of Parliament rather, commencing May 2014, I understand.
That's correct.
And during the period March 2017, or April 2017 to February 2018, you occupied no ministerial position. you were a Member of Parliament only.
That's right.
And during that time, what position did you hold in Parliament in relation to portfolio committees?
Just a member of Public Enterprises and one other portfolio committee.
And you will testify about that period in due course. In paragraph 6 of your statement, you refer to the preamble to our Constitution, and you've made brief reference to it already now. Do you have any further comment?
It's, if I may, Mr. Pretorius and Chairperson, read into the record some of the paragraphs from 6 onwards, so that it might
Yeah.
make it easier
Yes.
for yourselves as well,
That's fine.
if I may.
That's fine, yeah.
So I take us back to paragraph 4, with your permission. I am a lifelong activist and a member of the African National Congress. I believe in the principles of the Freedom Charter and in our Constitution. I am committed to contributing to the achievement of a constitutional democracy and the establishment of a democratic government guided by the preamble of the Freedom Charter that, and I quote, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, and that no government can justly claim authority unless it is based on the will of all the people, end of quote. The preamble of our Constitution commits us to uplift the poor, as do the objectives of the ANC Constitution, to eliminate inequalities, promote economic development for the benefit of all, and to create a society in which social justice and economic emancipation occur within a far-reaching transformation of our society. This transformation is multidimensional, being political, institutional, social, economic, and cultural, and I'm sure there are many other dimensions as well. But transformation and transitions also can unleash the forces of greed, corruption, and new means of exploitation. So participation in government as an ANC cadre is not just a technical or technocratic role, but one aimed at achieving the vision and goals of our leaders, such as Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Lillian Ngoyi, Bram Fisher, and many others. In contrast, state capture and corruption are consequences of the unleashing of the worst human instincts: self-enrichment, neglect of the higher mission, placing one's self-interest, and one might add one's pocket, before the community's interests. Reflecting on the period 2009 to 2017 now, it would appear that I was witness to events, some of which are set out below, and it seems an unwitting member of an executive in the earlier part of this period, which was misled, lied to, manipulated, and abused in order to, and these are parts of section 10, paragraph 10, benefit a few families and individuals. And this, Chairperson, is a theme that you will find throughout this statement. And the critical question, if I may say so respectfully for the Commission as well, who benefits from all of these activities? Is it the masses of South Africa that we all proclaim to serve, or is it the few who've now probably stolen hundreds of billions of rands of our own resources? Release the worst forms of recklessness and corruption, rob ordinary people of schools, clinics, and education, abuse and decimate key institutions of our democracy, including SARS, the Hawks, the NPA, SOEs, that's state-owned enterprises like Eskom, Denel, Transnet, and others. And of course, damage the economy, increasing joblessness, forsaking the youth, and increasing the marginalization of women. State capture became a sophisticated scheme or racket that advanced false narratives, including racist pejoratives, used external agencies like Bell Pottinger and the services of professional advisors, including management consulting firms, auditors, lawyers, one might add a whole list of other professionals, to entrench itself. Marginalized and dismissed honest public servants, and replace them with compromised or incompetent individuals. Again, if I may pause here, Chair, one of the things that we need to look at perhaps as the Commission, but generally as a society, is the kind of damage that we've done to lives of individuals and their families and the communities that they actually come from. People were left jobless, they were maligned, their reputations were tarnished, all through a project which said it's important to do that in order to, in a sense, engage in what I will call later the politics of distraction. So you create, in any war, as you know, or even a robbery, a familiar tactic is you create a decoy in one place so that something else can happen elsewhere. And we see that the human cost of what we are up to is quite a formidable one. We allowed a climate of impunity in respect of crime and corruption to emerge. A question that I'm sure will come up is, where does the governing party fall in all of this?
Certainly that will have to
So
come
I'm
up.
anticipating it.
Yeah.
So if I may, Mr. Pretorius, also continue. The ANC at its most recent elective conference in December 2017 noted and resolved as follows, and the resolution is headed ANC Credibility and Integrity Dealing with Corruption. And the resolution reads as follows, Chair. Noting an increase in corruption, factionalism, dishonesty, and other negative practices that seriously threaten the goals and support of the ANC, that these practices contradict and damage our mission to serve the people and use the country's resources to achieve development and transformation, that corruption robs our people of billions that could be used for their benefit, that the lack of integrity perceived by the public has seriously damaged the ANC image, the people's trust in the ANC, our ability to occupy the high moral ground, and our position as leader of society. That current leadership structures seem helpless to arrest these practices, either because they lack the means or the will, or are themselves held hostage by them.
Before you continue, may I just ask you whether you have your own views in relation to the contents of that particular paragraph? Do you know
I suppose that the test for all of us, Chairperson, is when you see or observe or become a marginal part of any malfeasance, what do? Do you turn and look the other way? Do you try to find ways of resisting that which is occurring? Do you actually bring to the attention of people that you are interacting with that what is going on is not in the best interest of the country or the government? And I'll read into the record later extracts from my first medium-term budget policy statement speech in 2009, October, where I raised the question of corruption and its potential damaging effect. Of course, we didn't understand state capture at that point in time. The next extract I will read into the record would be from the budget speech of 2010, where similar observations are made as well. But I will also, in a moment, come to what the Secretary General of the ANC at that point in time, Mr. Mantashe, had to say at various fora of the ANC, raising the same concern. So the challenge, I think, that Mr. Pretorius is raising is, how do you resist malfeasance when you see it? And an observation that I made to him and others as well, well, some of us watch rugby, don't play it. Others are familiar with soccer or other sport. But when you are the sports person on the field and are asked to apply your mind very quickly, whether you do A or B, in order to advance your team's cause, you work at that particular moment in time. But the spectator sitting on the stand, or the sports critic, has all the time in the world to say there were E, F, and G as options as well. And so the structure and the limitations of one's position needs to be taken into account in terms of the kind of possibilities that are open and the tactics, if you like, of resistance to malfeasance and corruption as well. So there can always be the argument one could have done more as well. But, you know, we have many advocates of the anti-corruption drive who suddenly find themselves on the other side of the line defending corruption in one form or another as well. So one must ask what drives people to do these sorts of things in this kind of context. May I continue with that?
We'll come back to that during the course of your evidence.
So I
Mr.
continue with
Gordhan.
the resolution, Chairperson.
Yes, I'm sorry. I also want to ask one or two questions in relation to the preamble, but I prefer that you finish quoting the preamble, then I can ask. So, yeah, thank
All
you.
right. At times, we do things that are not according to ANC or government policy or not legal or constitutional, and wait for courts to correct our actions. Our association with and the closeness of our leaders to business people facing allegations of corruption. This is still part of the noting section. That the ANC is endangered to the point of losing credibility in society and power in government. That our leadership election processes are becoming corrupted by vote buying and gatekeeping. That the state investigative and prosecutorial authorities appear to be weakened and affected by factional battles and unable to perform their functions effectively. Resolves that the 2015 NGC resolutions, plus other existing and new measures, are implemented urgently by the NEC and the provincial executives to, 1, strengthen our understanding of our values, ethics, and morality, and the demands that the people, the Constitution, and the rule of laws place on us as the guardians of the state and its resources. 2, demand that every cadre accused of or reported to be involved in corrupt practices accounts to the Integrity Committee immediately or faces DC, that's disciplinary committee, processes. And it continues, just 1 second, Chair, to say 3, summarily suspend people who fail to give an acceptable explanation or to voluntarily step down while they face disciplinary, investigative, or prosecutorial procedures. 4, we publicly dissociate ourselves from anyone, whether business donor, supporter, or member, accused of corruption or reported to be involved in corruption. 5, all ANC members and structures should cooperate with the law enforcement agencies to criminally prosecute anyone guilty of corruption. 6, the ANC should respect the Constitution of the country and the rule of law and ensure that we get the best possible legal advice in government to ensure our compliance wherever possible, rather than waiting to defend those who stray. 7, the ANC deployees to Cabinet, especially Finance, Police, and Justice, should strengthen the state capacity to successfully investigate and prosecute corruption and account for any failures to do so. 8, secretaries at all levels will be held accountable for any failure to take action or refer matters of corruption or other negative conduct in terms of the ANC's Code of Conduct to the relevant structures. 9, within the ANC nomination and election process, ban all slates and enforce the ANC Code of Conduct and disciplinary procedures, investigate and prosecute all cases or support of vote, investigate or prosecute all cases of vote or support buying or membership or branch gatekeeping. And finally, 10, implement the NEC resolution on state capture, including the expeditious establishment as requested or demanded by the Public Protector's report, the establishment of a Judicial Commission of Inquiry, which chair, of course, is this one. I said earlier on that I would make reference to the medium-term budget policy statement speech in October 2009, and I want to place that quotation.
I'm sorry, maybe before you do that, now that you have finished quoting the resolution, I just want to ask one or two questions.
Sure.
I think that there may be a lot more questions that may be asked arising out of the resolution, but maybe that might belong to a little later when you have dealt in your evidence with a number of things that we are going to hear about. But I just want to ask this question in relation to paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the resolution on the page that starts with noting. Then paragraph 5, it starts with the current leadership structures seem helpless to arrest these practices. And those practices are, of course, are those that are mentioned in the first paragraph. That is corruption, factionalism, dishonesty, and other negative practices that seriously threaten the goals and support of the ANC. I think that's the ones they are talking about. Am I correct?
Yes, that's...
Am I correct that the practices, is it your understanding too, that the practices referred to in that paragraph starting with the current leadership would be the practices referred to in the first paragraph?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Now, that paragraph says the current leadership structures seem helpless to arrest these practices. I assume, and you must tell me whether your understanding is different, I assume that those leadership structures that the paragraph is talking about would have been the leadership structures that existed before the conference at which this resolution was made, because obviously they couldn't talk about the ones to be elected, or that may have just been elected.
That's correct.
Okay. That paragraph appears to me, and you must tell me if your understanding is different, appears to be an acknowledgement by the ruling party that the leadership structures that it had up to that stage were failing to arrest corruption and these other practices that are mentioned there. Is that your understanding of the paragraph as well?
Well, either they're failing or they are inadequately managing.
Just repeat that, please.
So either they are failing,
yes,
or they are inadequately managing.
Or you may be
issues.
right, because they say they are helpless.
Yes.
to arrest these practices.
Okay, the word "seem," Chairperson, appears before helpless. So it's somebody's perception.
I agree. It says seem helpless, but of course, I would imagine that a resolution such as this would have been taken after quite some deliberation.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We may proceed. I think we'll deal with these and other aspects of the resolution when we maybe deal with the role of the governing party.
Yes, I would just like to ask one or two questions in relation to the resolution,
Thank
if
you.
I may.
Yeah.
The last paragraph under noting, Minister, refers to investigative and prosecutorial authorities. At the stage the resolution was taken, what was the position in your view? That's just before the word resolves, the reference to state investigative and prosecutorial authorities.
Well, that was, Chair, again, a conclusion that many people in our country had come to. And when we come to the issues around what constitutes state capture and what constitutes effective state capture, then we will come to the conclusion that the first object is to control some elements of political authority. The second is to then use that political authority to control key institutions which give out big tenders or engage in big procurement practices. And the third is then to ensure that nobody will properly investigate that malfeasance. And the fourth is if there's no proper investigation, or even if there is some investigation, then no effective prosecution takes place. And I think in the public domain, what I'm often struck by is the question that members of the public would put to myself, and I'm sure to many of you as well: why is it that no real big figure finds themselves in orange uniforms yet? In other words, why aren't they being prosecuted effectively? And there are all sorts of narratives which other people can come to the Commission with, but how many files are waiting on the desk of the National Prosecuting Authority where investigations have been done, charges have been formulated, but prosecutions haven't been either initiated or completed? And the lesson that one can draw from my tax experience, and this is a lesson that we learned from Australia, Sweden, and Canada, and many other countries, that a tax authority doesn't work effectively unless it combines two things, and in our context, a third thing. The two are providing good service to honest taxpayers. The second is a variety of forms of enforcement to dishonest taxpayers. I mean, if you make a mistake on your tax form, then you shouldn't be sent to jail. But if you are fraudulent in not declaring all of your income, as I'm sure is fairly common practice today, because the rate of stealing that's going on, I'm sure, doesn't find itself on the tax returns that people actually submit to the tax authority. And if there's no effective enforcement, then why bother? Because you know that you can get away with it, which was the situation in South Africa pre the 2000s, when more effective enforcement capability was developed. The third element to that we added in our own context was education. The vast majority of our people were excluded from meaningful economic activity, and the importance of paying tax or the importance of paying any dues is quite a crucial civic responsibility, and we find it today in the form of payments for electricity or water, even if people can afford to actually pay, and that results in the kind of debt that accumulates in the hands of water boards and indeed of Eskom as well, load shedding notwithstanding. So we must apologize to the country for that.
The intention, at least, Minister Gordhan, is stated in paragraph 7 over the page, but at the instance of the Chair, we'll defer any further questions about implementation of the resolution for later consideration in your evidence, if we may.
Sorry, I didn't quite get the point.
Paragraph 7
Yes.
records the resolution in relation to investigation
Yes.
and prosecution of corruption and accounting for failure to do so. But I wanted to just mention that, to note it for this stage, there will be further evidence that you will give later on, and perhaps further questions from the Chair in that regard in due course.
And if I may say so, Chair, the comments made by the many candidates that were interviewed by the panel looking into a new Director of National Prosecutions over the past week or so might be quite relevant here in relation to the state of the NPA and what it sounded like politicians canvassing a little bit, but what they would do if they were actually appointed to that position.
Yes.
The comments you make, unless you want to read paragraph 13 onto the record, I wanted to...
There's
deal
two
with
extracts,
issues in
Chair, that I
paragraph
want to
14.
read, if I may,
Yes.
onto the record. As I said earlier on, The first is an extract from the October 2009 medium-term budget policy statement, where we say the following as Treasury: for us to succeed, we need a shared compact across all the divides in this House and indeed across the nation. We will not tolerate corruption, we will act forcefully against wastage, and we will insist on value for money for the billions that we spend. The second is from the 2010 budget of February 2010, and I quote, "Measures to combat fraud and corruption. A major site of both wastage and inefficiency is in our procurement system. Through a combination of corrupt practices, inefficient procurement, poor planning, and in some instances collusion by the private sector, we are not getting the kind of value from our purchases that our people deserve. Even where there is absolutely no corruption, we sometimes give contracts to people who cannot implement them, and so houses are left without roofs, roads crumble when it rains, water schemes break down, and school books fail to get delivered. Mr. Speaker, corruption is an ever-present threat to our ambitions. All South Africans must constantly and consciously work to root out this cancer. If we are to address the scourge, we need improved management capability, governance, enforcement, and oversight in government and in the business sector," end of quotation. So we go back at that period. But the context here, Chair, is also relevant. This was the period when South Africa began to experience the aftershocks of the financial crisis that started in the United States and in Wall Street in particular in 2007, 2008. You will recall that as Mr. Zuma's first administration came into office, one of the announcements that had to be made by about June or July that year is that tax revenue would fall by 50 billion rands as a result of growth falling. And so started a whole process of what we today call fiscal consolidation. In other words, trying to manage your expenditure in line with the revenue base that you actually have. But secondly, taking a closer look at procurement practices where savings could actually be derived, whether that be at a municipal level, which is quite important for us today as well. There are all sorts of malfeasance going on there, or at a provincial level or national government sphere level. And that's the context for this emphasis. And each 6-month period, both Treasury and other departments would produce lists of achievements on the one hand, or new ideas. So we tried to manage the ceiling, if you like, for the cost of cars, or the number of overseas trips that could be made, and so on, which was part of the context that we found ourselves in. The second part, Chairperson, is, as I said earlier on, a few extracts from the reports that the General Secretary, it's actually Secretary General, Mr. Mantashe, placed before various structures of the ANC. And this particular one was a diagnostic organizational report prepared by him and his office. And I'll make this available to yourselves. But at one paragraph, he says the following, and I quote, "Stories of corruption in our government make weekly newspaper headlines. There is no effort to rebut them, thus creating space for them to take root. An emerging narrative is that we must not talk about corruption unless we have evidence, because it hurts the ANC. Society, on the other front, expects the ANC to take a stand against corruption. By taking serious action or being seen to do so, it expects our movement to deal with, and he uses the quotation, both tigers and flies when it comes to corruption. In other words, big corruption and small corruption. They expect to see arrests, prosecution, and conviction of both the small fries and important individuals. With more than half of the NEC members having been to China on a political exchange program, the ANC leadership should be able to understand the concept of, and quotation, dealing with both tigers and flies." So that's the first extract. The second extract was part of his organizational report presented at the December 2017 conference. And I quote, "Many in our movement are in denial that state capture is a reality facing our country. There is a strong view that state capture is a narrative mainly developed by the media and beneficiaries of the apartheid state, in which case the state cannot be regarded as captured if not all of its three arms are not captured. The debate is raging on, with society having strong views on the matter. The ANC, therefore, cannot afford to be perceived as confused or defensive in the face of this debate. This conference must provide concrete guidance to the leadership, not only on the position the ANC must take, but also how it should engage this debate. At this point in time, the ANC is divided in this debate to a point of seeing our disagreements as boxes of enemy camps." And I'm sure when the ANC appears before you, Chairperson, they'll be able to elaborate on this as well. This was followed by the last extract that I want to place before you during the January 8th statement delivered by the President. And I quote, "We shall confront corruption and state capture in all the forms and manifestations that these scourges assume. This includes the immediate establishment of a commission of inquiry into state capture. The investigation and prosecution of those responsible will be given top priority. Mechanisms for the appointment of individuals to senior government positions, state-owned entities, and law enforcement agencies will be strengthened to improve transparency, prevent undue influence, and ensure adequate vetting of candidates. We must work to restore the credibility of public institutions, including state enterprises and law enforcement agencies, by addressing excessive turnover in senior positions, undue political interference, poor coordination, and corruption." End of quotation. And in sum, I think what the Secretary General is saying is that we as the ANC, and I'm sure he'll be in a better position to articulate this when he appears before you, cannot be in a denialist mode, that it is in the interest of the organization, which has long served this country, to enable it to confront this cancer so that it can indeed stick to and accomplish what is intended in its slogan, i.e. unity and renewal, and renew the ANC so that it could continue to serve South Africa on the basis of the kind of principles that it was built. And if you put this in simple terms, Chair, when one has a cancer and goes to a surgeon, you can't say to the surgeon, take a little bit of the cancer out. You either take it all out, or if you leave some, it's going to kill you eventually. And I think that's the message that we are trying to understand and also propagate as extensively as possible.
Thank you, Minister. Before you continue, that perhaps will form a background to your evidence in paragraph 14 and certain questions that the legal team would like to put to you in regard to the contents of that statement. But Chair, it's past 11:15. May we take the short adjournment?
Okay, no, that's all right. Before we do that, let me check again. People at the back here, Mr. Pretorius as well? Okay, they say they do. Thank you. We'll take the short adjournment and we'll return not at 12:30, but at 1:25 to.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn.